Good evening, everyone. I'm Taylor Lauren, and this is another journey into our strange reality. So come join me. We'll hold hands together on this journey because it's strange, and you don't want to venture into the strange alone. That's how bad things happen. The Virginia Mountains are a vast region of Appalachia, steeped in thousands of years of stories and folklore. People there will tell you that strange things roam through the ridges and valleys, hiding in those dark places that only mountains can create. And they will definitely tell you that ghosts for sure haunt some of these lonely places in the mountains. Bluff Mountain lies just off the Great Appalachian Trail and Blue Ridge Parkway. This is a very beautiful and rugged area of the Blue Ridge Mountains. And usually where there's beauty, there is tragedy. And Bluff Mountain is no exception. It is the final resting place of little Ottie Powell, who wandered off up into the mountain and never came out. The day was November 9th, 1891. On an ordinary Monday, Miss Nanny Gilbert's one-room school was getting cold. The mountain weather was chilled and gloomy that day. Snow had fallen the week before and winter was well on its way. Miss Gilbert gave her students a small recess so that they could go outside and gather wood for the small stove that kept the classroom warm, and little Ottie Powell, being one of the youngest and smallest students in the class, at only 4 years old, and going to turn 5 that very month, followed his fellow classmates out into the woods. But when Miss Gilbert called for her students to return to the schoolhouse, little Ottie never showed up. Miss Gilbert and her students immediately went back out into the woods to search for Ottie. But when they couldn't find him, Miss Gilbert sent her students home so that they could go and gather their parents and other townsfolk to come and help search for the missing boy. Soon, everyone from the nearby town and farms were out on the mountains searching for Ottie. They scoured the woods calling out his name, but he never answered back. Night was quickly coming and a cold winter rain started to fall, now making the search nearly impossible. And they searched for him, all through the next day, and all through the next day, and all through the next week. And they didn't find anything of the boy. Not a track, not a shoe, not a piece of clothing, nothing. He had completely vanished into the mountain. The story of the missing boy made its way through the mountains and into the valleys, and over the next couple of weeks, hundreds of volunteers came out to search for the missing boy. But still, nothing was ever found of little Ottie. Winter came and covered the mountain in snow, and the Powell family had lost all hope of finding their boy alive. But a reward was still posted for his return, because either way, his family wanted him home with them and off of that lonely mountain. Now by spring, the snow started to melt, and on April 3rd, 1892, on the top of Bluff Mountain, a group of hunters were following their dogs off of an old hunting trail up the mountain. These seasoned hunting dogs began rooting around an area right off the trail, and the hunters soon realized that it was the remains of the young missing boy. The discovery of Ottie Powell's body at the top of Bluff Mountain came to a shock to everyone. No one thought that such a small child could climb to the top of that mountain, it being almost 7 miles from the schoolhouse that he'd left from. Evidence suggests that Ottie passed of exposure that first night on the mountain. They think that once little Ottie reached the top of the mountain, that he sat down to rest, and shortly after went to sleep and never woke back up. And it was somewhat of a comfort for the family to know that he had just passed in his sleep instead of something more horrible. But the mystery still remained on how such a small child could hike that far up a steep mountain, all on his own, and in such a short matter of time between the afternoon that he left the schoolhouse and then that evening when he sadly passed on top of the mountain. Most small children could not hike 7 miles up a mountain on such rugged terrain in the cold, which is why when searchers were looking for him, they didn't think to look on top of the mountain. They would have never thought that he would have made it that far, that he could have climbed that far on his own. And more sadly, with how much time has passed, over 130 years now, those questions will probably never get answered and will forever remain in those mountains. Now, poor little Ottie was buried on his family farm, where they could see him from the window of their home. But the grief was so heavy for them that they eventually moved to another town. And over time, the story about the little boy who got lost on Bluff Mountain became a legend. A memorial was placed where the boy was found. And soon, strange stories about the area were carried down the mountain by spooked hikers. Hikers have told stories about having eerie feelings at the top of Bluff Mountain. Things like hearing the shouting of a child off the trail and up towards the top of the mountain. They've heard the eerie sounds of a child shouting for help along the trail to the summit of the mountain, and even down the trail at the Punch Bowl shelter, right off the Appalachian Trail. Many people feel a presence at the shelter and feel watched through the long dark night, with many hikers packing up and getting the hell out of there as soon as the sun rises. Those staying at the Punch Bowl shelter have also experienced being prodded by an invisible force, as if something is trying to wake them up and get their attention. And they wake up in the morning to find their belongings have been tampered with. They wake up to find their things pulled out of their packs and placed around random areas in the shelter. And even more chilling, they hear the voice of a small child calling out for its parents. Now, in the Punch Bowl shelter, there is a logbook for Appalachian Trail hikers to write down that they were there, sign their name, and write little notes. And a lot of times, they write down about the spooky experience they had at the shelter. One hiker wrote in the book that he was awakened in the middle of the night by the sounds of a crying child, and saw what could only be the tiny spirit of little Ottie Powell, huddled in the corner of the shelter, and then disappeared. And this hiker swore that it could not have just been a dream, because when this hiker woke up, they found their belongings out of their pack. They found their clothes folded neatly on the floor with a pile of chestnuts placed on top. And the chestnuts are symbolic to the legend of Ottie Powell, because it's told that when Ottie Powell's body was found, that it was found with undigested chestnuts in his stomach. And I have no forensic background whatsoever, but I wonder how much tissue is left after being on top of a mountain for 6 months in those harsh elements, that they would be able to tell what he had eaten before he passed. Those are just my questions that will never get answered. But the chestnuts are part of the legend. So, also in the logbook, another hiker had an even more strange encounter. And he said, "I came in early afternoon, tired from the hike from Matt's Creek. The woods were smoky with fog. Approaching the shelter, I saw a small boy standing by the bench. I greeted him, but he said nothing." Then this hiker says something that creates a terrifying image and also creates new questions to the mystery of this mountain. He said that the boy laughed with a man-sized laugh and swung a scythe the size of a porch swing at him. Now, for me, images of Children of the Corn come to mind with this story. And I wouldn't think that the spirit of a lost child would be so malevolent as to swing a scythe around. It seems almost out of character from the whole rest of the story, because you're talking about a lost child, and this seems like something completely different. And I know that I like to talk about spooky stuff, but I can also be very skeptical, especially about stuff like demons and stuff like that I don't necessarily believe in. But there are a lot of stories of things that take the shape of other things because that's what people are thinking of. Maybe there could be something else on that mountain, and it takes the shape of a small boy because it knows that most people are expecting to see a small boy. There's no such thing as a paranormal scientist. We don't really understand any of these things yet. There are no concrete answers, only theories. So maybe something else lives in those woods. Something dark that could cause harm to anyone that gets close to it, or to the woods that it lives in. But anyway, these are some other notes found in the Punch Bowl logbook. One hiker wrote, "Came exploring. Me and my brothers went up the trail behind the shelter, walked about a mile, heard something coming through the woods, didn't stay to see what it was." Another hiker wrote that they were awakened in the night to the sound of crying, and when he turned on his headlamp, he saw Ottie sitting at the picnic table crying. The spirit then walked into the pond and vanished. Hikers will also leave toys and little gifts at Ottie's memorial on top of the mountain. And sometimes those hikers, they will walk down to the punch bowl, stay the night, and then come back up the mountain past the memorial, and they will find that those toys or gifts are gone. Now, one last strange account comes from a descendant of the Powell family who grew up in the area. He claims that his grandmother used to tell him stories about seeing lights at the top of the mountain, especially in the winter months. And she claims that it could not have been hunters because it would have been too cold and icy and snowy to be at the top of the mountain, especially at night. No one would have been able to survive up there long. But yet, she saw those lights at the top of the mountain every winter. And that is the legend of Ottie Powell. And if anyone is into the missing 411 phenomena, this definitely has a lot of elements of it. I would even consider it an antique missing 411 case, because there are so many instances of children starting off at point A and then being found at point B miles and miles away from where they started, across rugged territory that no child would really be able to manage on their own. Another element is that it was probably just minutes from Ottie disappearing to his teacher and his classmates looking for him, and he couldn't hear them or shout out, or for some reason they passed each other and didn't know it. And that seems to happen a lot in those cases. Searchers being impeded by bad weather. The night that Ottie disappeared, this winter rainstorm came in, pretty much washed out any tracks or sense or evidence that there would have been, especially back in the 1890s. They didn't have all the technology we have now, and even now, people can very much disappear in the woods and not be found. Definitely a very tragic ghost story. If you do hike to the top of Bluff Mountain, please make sure that you bring a little gift for Ottie. I'm sure he appreciates it. And watch out for whatever that other thing is that likes to mess with people. Those things seem to like to lurk in those places, in the woods, in the mountains. So always watch your back. Be careful out there. Let someone know where you are, when you're going, when you're going to be back, when to expect a call, anything like that, because you never know. So thank you for joining me in another journey into our strange reality.